Hi, if you're just joining us, we're going to give it a few moments for folks to trickle in, so please be patient while we get going. All right, Brett, take it away.
Welcome everyone to this AJC Campus Crash Course, National Politics on Campus from a Distance, an AJC town hall with college Democrats and college Republicans. My name is Brett Zaslavsky, and I'm a student at the University of Michigan and a former co-president of We Listen, a campus-based organization with the goal of bridging the American political divide through conversation. I'm also a proud alum of AJC's Leaders for Tomorrow program. LIFT helps high school students develop the skills and tools necessary to become strong Jewish leaders and advocates on our campuses and beyond. An idea that we discussed at great length in LIFT is the importance of engaging in a conversation that is productive. We may not always agree, but it is critical that as student leaders, we continue to have important discussions that enable real bipartisan understanding. I'm personally excited to hear from today's speakers, both of whom are exemplary young leaders themselves who understand the importance of conversation. We are privileged to have Mikaela Guido, President of College Democrats of America, and Chandler Thornton, Chairman of the College Republican National Committee, on today's call. Seffi Kogan, my friend at AJC's Global Director of Young Leadership, will be moderating the conversation. There will be time at the end for an audience Q&A. To submit questions for our panelists, please email your questions to campus@ajc.org. Seffi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you all for joining us. Mikaela and Chandler, I want to start off actually at what I think might be a point of agreement. You represent different parties, different politics, different constituencies, but one thing you have in common, that we all have in common actually, is that our lives have been majorly disrupted. A huge part of the work of college Democrats and Republicans is to get out the student vote and to empower students to organize other voters. So what is your message to students who want to get involved in the 2020 election, whether presidential or down ballot? They want to get involved right now while everything is upside down. Chandler, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, first, thank you, Seffi, for having us. Thank you, AJC, for organizing this town hall. I think this is such an unprecedented time. This is something that none of us have dealt with in our lifetimes before, or anything really similar to this. And I think the most important message is that it will get better. We will unite as a country, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. In terms of getting involved in the election that's around the corner, there are a number of ways that I think youth organizations have embraced technology as a way to stay better connected. We do it every single day over Zoom like this, and I think that the way we're training and engaging young voters is online right now, and hopefully we'll get to a point where we can engage on campus in person again. But right now, it's just so important for us to stay connected online and continue to promote a positive message across the country.
And Mikaela?
Absolutely. I just want to echo Chandler's point. Thank you so much for putting this together. A little bit about what College Democrats is doing. So we're really trying to take advantage of this transition to virtual that we've been seeing. We've all been thrown in the deep end with Zoom and everything, but something that College Democrats has been offering is a lot of various virtual trainings. We've partnered with a whole variety of different progressive organizations to get our students and our members trainings that they might not otherwise have. So trying to make light of moving virtual. We've also been very involved with text banking. And we've also been doing a lot of different programs through Zoom call with Democratic leaders. We have one coming up about voting rights and the importance there. There's also still time to get involved with Organizing Corps, which is the Democratic Party's different program right now to educate college students, get them trained to be field organizers during the general election, which is a great thing that's going on specifically in battleground states. And we've also been working just in the College Democrats area specifically is revitalizing our field plans to make sure that we're targeting the right areas and utilizing our virtual programs as much as possible.
Lots of good options there for students to get involved. AJC works on several different issues of concern to the Jewish community, but none more critical than addressing anti-Semitism. AJC's 2019 survey of American Jewish opinion, which ran, I think, in early October of 2019, found that 88% of American Jews see anti-Semitism as a problem in the US today. And strikingly, among our age group, respondents aged 18 to 29, 45% said that they personally have been the victims of anti-Semitic remarks or attacks. Critically, 35% of those 18 to 29-year-olds have experienced anti-Semitism on a college campus. Why do you think anti-Semitism is becoming more prevalent in our country? And what has your party done to combat hate, intolerance, and racism, including anti-Semitism, on campus? Mikaela, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, Democratic Party strongly disavows anti-Semitism. We stand with the Jewish community, and the rise of neo-Nazis and white supremacy has been a very scary and real topic the Democratic Party entirely condemns and disagrees with. So it's important to note that, the freedom of expression is important, but absolutely condemning hate speech because it creates a climate for violence, and we're definitely against that. And Democrats have always been fighting to end discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, language, religion, etc. So specifically on campus, something that we think is really important through CDA is uplifting Jewish voices, making sure that we're partnering with Jewish organizations on campus to, most importantly, show that different faith groups can exist and coexist and respect each other, and that's the most important thing. But that's kind of what we've been doing to combat that in the College Democrats area.
Mm-hmm. And Chandler?
Anti-Semitism is a huge problem across our country, and especially on college campuses today. And I think it's rooted in the BDS campaign, which, for those who are listening, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign. The boycott part is for consumers to boycott goods and services from Israel. The sanctions is for institutions like universities to divest their money from Israel. And so this movement and for sanctions, it's the governments for them to sanction Israel. And this movement is truly anti-Semitic, in my opinion. And it's something that the College Republican National Committee unanimously condemned last year in a resolution at our national board meeting. And this campaign is starting to grow on college campuses. We've been successful in many ways in fighting back. President Trump had a very strong executive order last year condemning and basically protecting Jewish students on college campuses who are discriminated against for the fact that they're Jewish and for their religion and their faith. And so we believe that pushing back on the BDS campaign is very important, and also very clearly, unequivocally condemning those neo-Nazis and those on the far right who are spreading white nationalism, white supremacy. That has no place in the Republican Party. And I don't think the BDS campaign has any place in our country either.
Mm-hmm. Chandler, since you bring up Israel or the opposition to Israel on college campuses, I wanted to, I think we'll come back to, but I wanted to touch on Israel as an issue more broadly first. Today, among the vast majority of American elected officials, Israel remains a unifying topic in both the Senate and the House, and in city and state governments across the US. Israel is probably, in my opinion, one of the last truly bipartisan subjects. We've seen noisy news headlines that kind of would disagree with that, but certainly among the leadership of both parties, elected officials of both parties, it's a bipartisan issue. There's no guarantee, though, that will continue. So I want to ask each of you, and Chandler, we'll start with you, what can your party do to ensure that bipartisanship on Israel continues into the next generation of elected leaders? And what can you do to help the spirit of cooperation and bipartisanship that exists at the elected level? What can you do to help bring that to the campus level?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the U.S. Israel relationship truly never has been stronger than it is today. I think President Trump is the most pro-Israel president of our lifetime. He's been there supporting our ally in Israel every step of the way, whether it's moving the U.S. Embassy to the eternal holy capital of Jerusalem, whether it's continuing to send a strong message when it comes to foreign aid, and protecting Israel at every step of the way when Israel is surrounded by many different nations who don't believe that it has a right to exist. And this is a country that punches way above its weight. It's the physical size of the state of New Jersey, and yet it leads the way in so many different industries across the country. Even look at coronavirus aid, Israel's leading the way when it comes to providing relief for those who need it. And when it comes to making sure this is a bipartisan issue, I think the Republican Party is doing a great job of that in this current Congress. I think the Republican Senate's doing a great job. And it's important, I think, for both Republicans and Democrats to stay united on this issue, because it is one of the biggest issues that we can agree on and something that's so critically important to our future.
Mm-hmm. Mikaela.
Yeah, I think that the best way to start this is, and to continue that bipartisanship, is making sure that we're educating people in our respective organizations from the start. College Democrats has always been a big proponent of, seeking that information from whichever realm you feel is most conducive of that idea. So making sure that they're staying educated on this topic, and diversifying like a viewpoint is really important. The Democratic Party believes in a strong and secure Israel, believe in Israel's right to defend itself. And I think that all of those things, we need to make sure that we're continuing that conversation in College Democrats, because those are going to be the people who are leading the movement in years to come. So it's a great place to start with that education.
Mm-hmm. I want to follow up here. So I'm going to pose a follow-up question. Just before I do, I want to remind our listeners that if they have questions, whether now or when it comes to them, they should please feel free to email those questions to campus@ajc.org. And that's how we'll collect your questions, and then I will relay them to our panelists. I just wanted to follow up because you both gave strong and even reassuring answers about kind of working toward ensuring that the future of your party is a pro-Israel one. I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can take the bipartisanship that exists today and bring that to the campus level, because right now something that we see often is there's kind of this like one-upsmanship maybe that exists on the Republican side of students, where maybe Republicans on campus are very quick to write off Democrats as potential allies on Israel issues, and conversely, often Jewish students who are pro-Israel or non-Jewish students who are pro-Israel report that they feel kind of unwelcome sometimes in democratic circles on campus. So do you think that there's something that college students can learn from the way that elected officials kind of, this is not usually a good way of referring to people, but career politicians can, from the way that they handle the issue? Is there something that students can learn and bring that to their college campuses?
I think,
sorry, Chandler, we'll start with you.
Well, it's a great question. I think the most important thing here is having the dialogue, and something that college Republicans and college Democrats have done very well in the past, thanks to a number of organizations, including APAC, which has really led the way on this issue with college Republican and Democrat outreach as well in the past. And it's starting the conversation, building friendships. I can, name several national college Democrat leaders who I've become close friends with. Mikaela and I had the opportunity to go to Israel together a couple of years ago with a group of college Republicans and college Democrats. And I think that having that exposure, having the conversation, and building the relationships is really what it's all about. And that goes for any issue, any policy issue that might exist. If you can build a relationship with the other side, and we can see each other as human beings and not just by, red versus blue, then I think that'll go a long way, because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We all want the same things. We just have different ways of going about, the policy preferences of doing that. So I think having that dialogue, forcing the debate, healthy debate and free speech is a great thing. And that's something that I think we'll continue to encourage in the future.
Thank you. Mikaela?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that facilitating that conversation is the most important thing. I think that people get very discouraged by what they see on the media today of like just how polarizing and like partisan the parties are. But any opportunity that I think we get to find common ground is really important, and we should really take that and run with it. And that's what I think that College Democrats, College Republicans does a good job at facilitating. At my own undergraduate campus at Florida Southern, we had a really strong relationship with College Republicans, and it was really reassuring to be able to have those conversations, have respectful conversations, and also conversations that help educate each other, because I feel like that's a huge barrier is one, not seeing something through someone else's eyes, but also not having that information that the other side might be looking at. So I think that that's really important. And that's something that uniquely you can do on college campuses. So I think it's really important to start there.
One thing that I've heard, I graduated college 5 years ago, so I'm old now, I guess is the term for it. One thing that I've heard in the 5 years since from a number of current undergraduates is that oftentimes young American Jews will arrive on college campuses, and of course the Jewish community is known for being perhaps, you know, one of the most liberal constituencies in America. Certainly there are Republican Jews, but I think it was something like 80% of American Jews in 2018 voted for a Democratic candidate. Chandler, I hope you won't take it personally. You know, well,
we'll see what happens this November.
AJC, of course, is the bipartisan organization. But we hear, I've heard all these stories of young American Jews arriving on campus, eager to be involved in liberal or progressive causes, and then they find themselves either shut out entirely, or there's kind of like a litmus test before a young Jewish student could enter into a progressive group. They need to kind of proactively disavow Israel in some way. Mikaela, what would be your message to the people who are kind of acting as ideological guardians, ideological purists on campuses, leading these groups? What would be your message to them about Jewish students in Israel?
Yeah, so I think that problem in particular pervades a lot of aspects of our local groups and stuff, not specifically just Israel, but there are a lot of instances where that's kind of a problem with who gets to have a say in the conversation. So I think that the baseline is just making sure that everyone's voices are heard. I think it's also really important that we note that you know, it's okay to be critical of politicians and critical of people in positions of power in the government while not delegitimizing an entire country. So I think that that's really important, and that's an important message that we want to drive in. But definitely on our college campuses, we really try to encourage open and respectful conversation, especially about these types of topics in particular.
Chandler, we just heard Mikaela talk a little bit about kind of that divide in the Democratic Party on Israel. From AJC's perspective as committed friends of Israel, it's critical to keep the issue of the U.S. Israel relationship bipartisan. But there are some, you know, as you mentioned, the Republican Party certainly sees itself as strong friends of Israel. Elected Republicans often take very pro-Israel steps. There are some national Republicans also who have maybe exploited the extreme views of some of the leftmost fringe of Democrats and argued that Jews shouldn't be able to support the Democratic Party in good conscience. What would you say to those Republicans?
Well, I wouldn't say that anyone has exploited the fact that there are some very far left elements of the Democratic Party, some of whom are elected members of Congress who have been not the greatest friends of Israel. I wouldn't say that's been an exploitation. I think calling it out is important. I think that we need to strongly condemn the words and actions of those who have not stood up for the U.S. Israel relationship. And I think that's exactly what Republican leaders have done. And I think, I would want anyone to do that regardless of party if they weren't standing strong for the U.S. Israel relationship. And so I think to say that it's an exploitation is kind of I wouldn't agree with that terminology. I think instead it's more exposing what's actually happening. And there is this element in the Democratic Party, more of the Bernie Sanders wing, that isn't very pro-Israel. And I think, hopefully we see that starting to change, but calling it out is not a bad thing.
Would you think that, I agree with you, by the way, that it's not a bad thing to call out people who say things that are, unfairly biased against Israel? Certainly, I would say AJC agrees with you on that. Would you say that it's appropriate for a non-Jewish Republican leader to say, a message to the Jewish community is you should not be supporting Democrats because Democrats are not pro-Israel?
I think that's completely fair. And I think that many Jewish Americans are receptive to President Trump's message. I think that they're finally seeing a president who's willing to stand up for Israel, move the U.S. Embassy to its rightful place of Jerusalem, stand up for Israel in ways, present a peace process in ways that we haven't seen before. I mean, it's been over a decade since Israeli and Palestinian leaders have really had an opportunity to shake hands and actually talk about something. And President Trump's peace plan, while it's not completely finalized, I think it's a great way forward. And it's something that I think both parties will eventually embrace, and something that I think he's really leading on, something that the president is very passionate about.
Thank you. I'll just note before we depart from the Israel and anti-Semitism issues, at least for now, before we turn to audience questions, I'll just note that we at AJC have long viewed presidents of both parties and elected leaders of both parties to be deep and sincere friends of Israel. Certainly, we found plenty of things to applaud the last president for, and plenty of things to applaud this president for, and look forward to seeing friends of Israel and the Jewish people in the White House for generations to come. Departing now briefly, or possibly briefly, from those topics, the current economic reality is certainly a frightening one. For seniors in college, perhaps especially, and maybe some far-sighted juniors as well, the prospect of finding a job after college is very daunting. What is your party's prescription for the country to help jumpstart the economy and the job market? Mikaela, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think that that's something that's been very scary for a lot of people recently. I know I was supposed to be in the same cohort that was graduating this semester, but I graduated early and moved on to law school, so I kind of got lucky in that regard. But a lot of my friends are, in the same problem of looking for jobs, and there's a lot of uncertainty there. And I think that this shows, and what the Democratic Party has been really pushing, is that it's so important that we have those safety nets there for something like this that is completely unforeseen, unpredictable. I think it's also important that we emphasize the importance of bipartisanship, because we have this. It's so important to get things done at this point, and this is when the government is most necessary and directly affects people's day-to-day living. So I think it's important that we emphasize those sorts of things and make sure that we're putting those at the forefront, because there is a lot of uncertainty right now. But working together and making sure that we have those safety nets for recent grads, making sure that we're postponing those student loan payments is really important, because students are not going to be able to afford those student loan payments, which in the first place are too expensive, but that's a whole other issue. So making sure that, we're postponing those, that we're working together to find a common solution is the best thing that we can be doing right now.
Thank you, and we'll come back to college affordability in a minute or two. Chandler, what do you think? What's your party's prescription for jumpstarting the economy and the job market?
Well, you mentioned youth unemployment, and not only is it a challenging time for a young person to enter the job market, but it's a challenging time for every American. The entire employment picture right now is a challenging one, and one that I think is going to be challenging for a while. But I think that the president and the administration and some of the proposals that have gone through Congress are going to be helpful in jumpstarting the economy. I think we'll see how it goes in some of the states that are beginning to slowly and safely reopen their economies and their states. And hopefully, if done in a safe way and taking public health precautions into consideration, those economies can start to be jump-started again. But not only is it difficult for a young person right now, but it's difficult for every single American. And not only is it difficult for a young person graduating college who might look for a higher paying job, but even if that job weren't available and they were going to seek something in the service industry, for example, or in retail, those jobs aren't available for young people either. So it's especially challenging for young people right now. And hopefully we can all start to unite. Social distancing is so important, not only for public health, but if we can slow the process and slow the spread, as the president has said, then we can start to reopen the economy safely. And that's the goal.
Thank you. College affordability, as Mikaela mentioned before, is a major issue and a topic of debate during this election cycle, certainly in the Democratic primary campaign, but broadly as well. Does your party have a plan to make college more affordable, and what does that look like? Chandler, we'll start with you.
Definitely. College affordability is, I believe, inherently a conservative or Republican issue that the party should embrace. And I think it all starts with the cost of higher education. If we start looking at the Bernie Sanders type proposals out there, like free college, that's really only a Band-Aid on the problem, or student loan forgiveness or something like that, complete elimination of student debt. That's only looking at the result of the problem and not the actual root of it. And so I think a better solution would be to look at the actual cost of higher education. And I think actually a silver lining in the coronavirus pandemic is that we're starting to see distance learning and online education as something that we should be embracing. Why should it cost $60,000 a year to attend a college? And there are lawsuits ongoing right now pertaining to students being refunded partially for some of their semesters being interrupted by coronavirus. But it just goes to show that you can have a quality education and do it without spending so much money. So I think we need to encourage and perhaps look at some enforcement mechanisms for college, lowering the actual cost. None of the lazy river water rides that you see on campuses, the 5-star restaurant caliber cafeterias. There's a lot of unnecessary spending at colleges and universities that I think we need to look at first. And once we do that, then we can talk about a plan for student loans.
We didn't have a lazy river at Columbia, but now I really wish we had. Columbia might be one of the schools that could afford it. Mikaela.
Yeah, so I agree with Chandler on a lot of these things. The cost of college is just far too high. The Democratic Party distinctly believes in making sure that college can be accessible, and there should be a debt-free way to go to college. Working families shouldn't have to pay tuition to go to public colleges and universities. We should be, at this point with student loan debt, we should be allowing students to refinance their loans at lowest rates possible, specifically in this environment that we're in right now. Want to expand and access to income-based repayment so that we're never having to pay more than we can afford. That's a big thing that the Democratic Party believes in. And then overall, like Chandler was saying, just making sure that we're cutting that unnecessary spending. Also really important that the Democratic Party believes in is making sure that we're cracking down on those for-profit colleges that are taking millions in federal financial aid, and also making sure that we're securing a fund for HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, because it's really important to make sure that we're combating that disparity between racial and socioeconomic lines, so making sure that those institutions are funded correctly.
And I think just to add on, if I might add one point,
Go ahead.
I want to underscore that the student loan problem is more it's not just about the cost of higher education. That is the first problem. But recognizing that 45 million Americans carry over $1.5 trillion worth of student loan debt is something that we all have to recognize. But if we start looking at the cost of college, that way we can prevent future generations from incurring this debt. And the reason why I don't think free college or complete forgiveness is fair, because there are families out there who chose to not take out student loans. Students may have had to work multiple jobs. Their family maybe didn't go on certain vacations or change their lifestyle when their children were growing up and getting ready to go to college in order to afford college, and so that they wouldn't have to take out student loans. So then completely forgiving it for those who did, I don't think is fair for those who didn't take out student loans.
Thank you. We're getting some great questions coming in from the audience. I'll just add, we have, between our Facebook audience and our Zoom audience, we have many hundreds of people tuning into this conversation with Mikaela and Chandler. This question is directed to Mikaela, but I'm gonna ask each of you maybe to answer a version of the question. It comes from Leo Greenberg, who is I think he's a high school senior, might be a high school junior. He's so well-spoken when I've met him that I assume that he's a senior. Leo says, I'm a politically progressive high schooler who is staunchly pro-Israel. What do you find are the most effective ways to engage with and move those who have ingrained anti-Israel views on the left? So that's the way he framed the question, which we'll direct to you, Mikaela. And afterwards, Chandler, I'll ask you, the kind of when we talk about anti-Semitism, we at AJC talk about anti-Semitism coming from three distinct sources. Anti-Semitism that comes from the far left, that's the kind of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism that comes from the far right, which is the white supremacist style anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism that is enacted by people who believe themselves to be acting in the name of Islam, jihadist anti-Semitism. So Mikaela, you'll answer please the original question, and Chandler, I'd be interested in hearing from you. What about the kind of the polar opposite, the politically conservative high school student who wants to get involved in the conservative causes, but is troubled by this kind of white nationalist strain that exists in that camp? Mikaela, we'll begin with you and the original question.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something that we have tried to facilitate a conversation in college Democrats about. So I think that that's really the best solution, the best baseline solution is having respectful conversations, because oftentimes these conversations devolve into offensive conversations, and it's really hard to get any point across when people feel directly attacked. So I think that it's facilitating a respectful conversation. And it's like I said earlier, it's really important to be critical of politicians and to question that authority that you're hearing, and be critical of people in power in Israel. But you can do that without delegitimizing Israel, and I think that that's really important, and that's a really important thing that needs to pervade those conversations. And just making sure that we have that respectful conversation, and that we're not denouncing other people's beliefs within the party at the same time, because while it is a bipartisan topic that we agree on, there's still a variety of opinions about it within the Democratic Party. But the Democratic Party is it's a wide party. There's a lot of different views on the spectrum within that, and the most important thing is that we respect those views, and that we have a conversation and come to a consensus on what's the best approach to whatever topic is at issue.
I think Leo is asking more about kind of the retail politics of the matter, right? He is, he's one person. He could try to, build an organization and make change in that kind of broader scale. But if he's just sitting down with a friend who says, you're progressive, I'm progressive, but how can you really be progressive if you're pro-Israel? What are some tips that you would offer, Leo, to try to change someone's mind on that kind of a topic?
You know, I think that's really difficult. It's something that we're trying to figure out. If I had the answer, I think that we'd all be of the same opinion in the Democratic Party. So I wish I could give you that answer, but I mean, I think that the thing that is most important is establishing that communication and the respectfulness. And that's baseline. I mean, there are other issues in the Democratic Party that Democrats are still split on. So it's important that we're listening to each other and really listening to, because you can have that conversation, but then you're just talking at each other. So making sure that you're understanding, you know, where those points come from, where you're getting your information, and making sure that you're listening to the other person on the other side, because that's the most important thing that you can do. And I think that that's something that the Democratic Party stands for as a whole is, you know, listening, providing empathy towards each other. Something that I think is really important and kind of the outline of the party. So I think that it's really important that we try and continue that, especially on those small, you know, conversations.
Thank you. And Chandler?
Well, I want to thank Leo for his question. And Leo, I know that you mentioned you have some progressive views, but if the U.S. Israel relationship really matters to you and you care about it, I would say the Republican Party will welcome you with open arms. We are unequivocally a pro-Israel party, and we believe in the importance of the relationship without hesitation. I think to answer your hypothetical question about a graduating high school senior, I don't know if that, you know, if that really exists. I don't know if that concern is out there among people who are graduating high school who aren't encouraged. They're conservative, but they're discouraged by certain elements of the party, because the Republican Party is very clearly condemned white nationalism, white supremacy, always. And it's something that the college Republicans have done. When I was first elected national chairman, we unequivocally condemned what happened in Charlottesville and the Unite the Right rally. It's not conservatism. The conservatism that we believe in is the party of Lincoln, freedom and opportunity for everyone, regardless of their race, religion, sexual orientation, gender, sex, everything. And so we believe in freedom and opportunity for everyone. And so I would give that message to anyone who might have those concerns if that person exists out there.
How do you think it happens, though, that, you know, just because this is in the news right now, some of those, you know, open the economy back up protests, which are, you know, largely taking place in states with Democratic governors, protesting those Democratic governors. And we've seen, you know, Nazi and white supremacist rhetoric and imagery enter into that. These are people who feel that they, you know, that they're standing arm in arm with Republicans who might hold some of the admirable perspectives that you just highlighted, Chandler. But you know, we're seeing things like someone holding up an Arbeit macht frei sign to protest J.B. Pritzker, right? And J.B. Pritzker, Arbeit macht frei, of course, referring to the gate at the entrance to the Auschwitz death camp, and J.B. Pritzker being descended from Holocaust survivors.
We have to, without any hesitation, tell those people that they're not welcome in the Republican Party. You know, this is a free country, and they have a lot of freedoms afforded to them under our Constitution when it comes to free speech, and that varies depending on whether it's hate speech or not. But ultimately, those messages are not welcome in the Republican Party, and I think every Republican elected official would agree with me on that, and the president would agree too, that the Republican Party does not support anything remotely close to white nationalism or white supremacy, and we believe this country should be equal and the opportunity should be equal for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Sarah from San Francisco asks, how should we be tackling climate change on campus? What is the need for public policy on climate change as it relates to campuses and universities? We started with Mikaela for the last question, so Chandler, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think having a conversation surrounding environmental issues and energy issues is very important and something that we should all engage in. I think striving towards American energy independence is definitely a priority and something that we should be considering, and not only diversifying our resources and bases of energy, but exploring different options that we haven't necessarily invested in, like nuclear, for example, and other low emissions opportunities to have resources of natural resources for our country. And so energy independence is really important. And I believe that Americans agree with the Republican Party on that we need to stop being so reliant on other countries for our energy resources, but also researching and developing new technologies to invest in the future, and recognizing that conservation is so important, and preserving our natural resources, whether it's our national parks, our resources around the world. We only have one planet, and I think that it's something that we can all agree on, that conservation is really important.
Thank you, Mikaela.
Yeah, so I think that this is a really important issue for college students, because college students are going to be the ones directly affected by climate change and by inaction when it comes to climate change and the politicians that we have currently. Universities and colleges are some of the worst in combating climate change, just because there's so much waste that comes off of those campuses. So making sure that we're starting there, that we're putting pressure on our universities and in college campuses to be more renewable and sustainable is really important. So far as, more of a wide lens, making sure that we're trying to develop clean fuels to lower our energy bills, combating climate change, making sure that we have that clean energy is something that's really important, and also providing assistance for producers who put an emphasis on sustainability and improving natural resources, and all of those things are really important and something that the Democratic Party believes in. But as college Democrats, it's really important that we have that pressure put on our colleges. We just had a program last week where we spoke a lot about climate change on one of our online programming things. So if you're interested in more information on that, make sure that you kind of tune into those things. We have them our programs director, Grace Forster, has been working really hard to make sure that all of the issues that college Democrats believe in, we're having discussion on them. And we also have, different caucuses within college Democrats to make sure that we're combating climate change. One is in particular the Environmental Caucus that is working on this. So those are all some things that college Democrats are trying to do to bring that issue to the forefront, because it's really important.
Thank you. Jared Bach from GW University, so Chandler, your neighbor, I guess, says, what are your thoughts on the deal of the century? He is referring to President Trump's proposed peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which was welcomed resoundingly on the Israeli side, rejected overwhelmingly among Palestinian leaders, but found some purchase in other Arab leaders elsewhere in the Arab world. What are your thoughts on the deal of the century and the future of a Palestinian state? Mikaela, we can start with you.
Yeah, so I think that, so the baseline, the Democratic Party believes that in a two-state solution that is negotiated directly by the parties, that guarantees Israel's future and a secure democratic Jewish state, as well as Palestinian independence, sovereignty, and dignity. And if those parties aren't in agreement, I don't think that it's the correct solution. So making sure that we're coming to that conclusion in those negotiations through all parties involved is really important. And the United States is in a very interesting place in all of that, because the United States has facilitated all of those peace talks up to date. So making sure that those parties are involved and making sure that it is a two-state solution is the most important thing.
Thank you. Chandler.
Well, I think this is a really important question, and one that deserves all of our attention, because this is a conflict that has existed for so many years. Israeli prime ministers have presented maps over the years to the Palestinians, and for the first time, I think we're seeing something that actually could get done thanks to this administration. We've seen a number of talks over the years get to certain points and then they dissolve. And I think this one is one that could have potential to actually resolve the issue or work towards that. And I think that something that prioritizes Israel's right to defend itself when so many in the region are funding terrorists and terrorism against Israel. It's something that is very important, and I think the president's plan does just that. And I think that hopefully we'll start to see more support from the region, and I fully support it.
Thank you. We've received a few astute questions from astute listeners who noticed that I pressed Chandler on the white supremacist issue or question about white supremacists in the Republican Party, and feel that I did not sufficiently query you, Mikaela, about some of the far left anti-Semitic issues that have been raised in the Democratic Party. So I'll read one question from Max Brill. He writes very politely, Ms. Guido, you specifically condemned white supremacists, but did not address the far left wing of the Democratic Party, which includes members like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who have trumpeted anti-Semitic tropes in addresses and over Twitter, even going so far as to call Israel an apartheid state. How do you address these discrepancies in your party with your view of a zero tolerance policy for anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. So Speaker Pelosi has publicly condemned those statements, the anti-Semitic rhetoric that has rose out of them. And I think that it's really important that we do make sure that we do that. I think it's also important to note in the Democratic platform, I know that Chandler talked about the BDS movement a little bit. The Democratic Party condemns the BDS movement as well. So making sure that we're holding those politicians accountable, that the party is, and I think that the party has done a good job at that, and making sure to call out those politicians that have try to unearth those opinions, but their rhetoric comes off and is anti-Semitic. And I think that it's important to follow suit from Speaker Pelosi and make sure to call that out within the party, and it's really important.
Thank you. A few questions have come in about vote by mail. Questions about vote by mail, which party that advantages, whether it's sound policy, whether it's simply necessary as a result of the coronavirus reality. Chandler, what's your perspective on vote by mail?
Well, I think right now in May of 2020, the election's still several months away. We don't know what summer is going to look like. There are conversations about a second wave. There are conversations about mutations of the virus, the coronavirus. So we don't really know what it's going to look like in the days leading up to Election Day this November. With that said, I think that this is a state's issue and something that states should be left to decide whether they want to conduct their elections by mail or not. Several states, including Colorado, Washington State, a number of others already conduct their elections by mail, but I do think it should be a state's issue.
And Mikaela?
So I think it's incredibly important that we're pushing states to make sure that vote by mail is accessible, but more than that, making sure that we still have the voting in person option that follows whatever protocol that scientists and healthcare professionals believe to be the least susceptible to transferring the virus. But it's really difficult because a lot of the poll workers are older, and that community is more at risk when it comes to coronavirus. So making sure that we have that vote by mail option, but also more than that, making sure that, poll workers are able to help people, via phone if people have questions about that vote by mail, because that's a real problem that comes with vote by mail is, not allowing people to receive information about if they have a question about their ballot or something like that, but also making sure that you have that in-person option, because people with disabilities really need that in-person option. Vote by mail might not be as helpful for them in that regard. So making sure that we have that wide variety. But vote by mail is incredibly important, and just to make sure that that we keep that on so far as the general election, because I don't think that we think COVID-19 is going away anytime soon. So making sure that those practices are in place to start with.
Mm-hmm. One thing I might add on vote by mail that we don't really know, it hasn't been used in enough examples to know if it can credibly be certified. Ballots are often lost in the mail. So those are some of the problems that I know states are tackling right now. Can vote by mail ensure election integrity and everyone's vote actually being counted?
Yeah, and just to touch on that a little bit, I think it's important that we're not making Americans choose between safety and health safety and voting, because it's really important. And at this point, that's something that we might be doing if we're not allowing vote by mail to be widely accessible. So making sure that they don't have to make that decision between their health and safety and voting, because voting is a fundamental right in America.
Now is probably as good a time as any to remind our audience of the importance of social distancing and following any and all relevant guidelines for your geographic area. 20 to 30 years ago, there was such a thing as a conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican, and I'm thinking, 20 to 30 years from now, right? So in 2040, 2050, when you're both, well into your third or fourth term as U.S. senators, what will we, is it desirable that such a thing would exist? I'm certainly not the first person to point out that there's been this great sort where, Republicans are exclusively and only conservative. Okay, there are a few counterexample. Democrats are exclusively and only liberal. Both parties are kind of getting sick of one another. What can we be doing in those intervening years between now and a few decades from now to try to create a situation where there is more bipartisanship on more issues? And we will start with you, Mikaela, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the beauty in the Democratic Party is that we represent a lot of different views and a lot of different branches of ideologies within the Democratic Party. And I think that's important because, it pushes us to constantly reevaluate, party platform, to question who's in authority. And I think that comes with a lot of great ideas that manifest within the Democratic Party, the party of progression. So making sure that we, keep that important aspect of the party, but also emphasize that, that comes with that is coming to a consensus is difficult. So I think that it's really important that we listen to all of those views and we welcome them within the Democratic Party, because it's important. It keeps our party well-rounded and accountable rather than all believing in one unified thing. And I think that when we have those varying ideologies within the Democratic Party, it's easier to come to bipartisan ideas and to work across the lines. And I think that that's really important.
And Chandler.
So I would push back a little bit. I do think that there is a diversity of viewpoints in the Republican Party. If you look at governors across the country who are Republicans and traditionally Democratic states who are a little bit more independently minded, but at the end of the day, they are conservatives, Governor Hogan being a great example in my home state of Maryland. But I would say that the Republican Party has always been a big tent party, and we believe that states are the laboratory of ideas. And so being a party that encourages states and localities to develop policies and not federalize everything, and really providing states to have the rights to conduct their governments and their states how they see fit, I think is something that'll promote more diversity and more competition of ideas, which is something that we all believe in as Americans. We believe in the free marketplace of ideas, and that if you debate different ideas and you try out different policies, the best ones will win out the day. So I think that's really important.
Thank you. Okay, one last question for each of you. You have an audience here of Jewish campus activists and people who love and support Jewish campus activists. Give us your 30-second commercial about why it's your party that speaks to their concerns. Chandler, we'll start with you.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I'll start by saying that President Trump is the most pro-Israel president of our generation. You can count off the list of accomplishments that this administration has done. And I think it is important to note how strong the U.S. Israel relationship is right now. Many presidents have tried to do what this one has when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict, and they have not been able to do it. And I think that you have to, if you care about pro-Israel politics, you care about the U.S. Israel relationship, you should be looking at the Republican Party, because it's the only truly pro-Israel party, I believe, and that's my personal opinion right now in America.
Thank you, Chandler. And Mikaela?
So I believe that the Democratic Party is very welcoming to, all people. We believe in equality for all, and we stand against discrimination on the basis of, any of those subsets that I went over earlier. But we publicly disavow anti-Semitism. We stand with the Jewish community. We believe in respectful, discussions and educating everyone, and I think that's really important. That we bring in different faiths and different ideologies, because it's what makes us a better party, and having all of those voices heard and listened to is really important. But that's kind of what I believe the Democratic Party looks at, and I would love to see more Jewish students involved with College Democrats on campus. If you're interested, you should reach out. You can literally email me directly at president@collegedems.com, and I'd be happy to connect you with your local campus or your state federation.
Thank you. I'll just, my last word will just be those moving magical words that AJC is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that neither endorses nor opposes candidates for elective office. For an actual closing, I will turn now to my friend Brett Zaslavsky. Thank you, Mikaela and Chandler. Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. During these difficult times, we take solace in knowing that while students cannot gather together in person, we can still maintain our communities virtually. The AJC Campus Crash Course series is helping maintain the student community throughout the pandemic, and is providing weekly opportunities to stay engaged remotely with such critical advocacy work. Thank you for tuning in today to our town hall conversation with Mikaela and Chandler. Please join us next week for Ask the Experts, Free Speech on Campus, with AJC's Chief Legal Officer, Mark Stern, and AJC's new U.S. Director for Combating and Monitoring Anti-Semitism, Holly Huff-Nagel. Registration information can be found at ajc.org/advocacy anywhere. Thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.